Welcome everyone to the finale of our Napoleonic Wars series, the Battle of Waterloo. I know that they've got the Napoleon's marshals, and at some point down the road we will get to those. But after we wrap this one up, we are going to be moving on to some other content. So as always, I welcome your recommendations. I am going to be throwing up a vote today in fact, by the time you watch this, it will already be live, for our members and for our patrons. To vote on what they would like to see next as far as reaction goes. So if you are a member or a patron, go ahead and vote on those, and then I will combine the results of those two things, and we'll see what you guys choose. So I'll throw up some different ideas up there. I am pre-recording some reaction videos. I'm actually recording 2 videos a day this week, so I'm actually recording this one the same day that I recorded yesterday's episode, so that I have regular content for you while I am in London and in Bastogne next week. As always, links are in the description to the original content as well as to the beginning of this reaction series. Let's dive into the Battle of Waterloo.
April 1814. For 10 years, one man has dominated Europe. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French.
Isn't it kind of interesting, and I may have mentioned this at some point way back in the beginning of the series, that 2 of the most prominent conquerors of Europe in the last 200 years were both leading nations that they weren't born in? Kind of interesting. Napoleon, born in Corsica, which actually had technically just become French like the year before he was born, but he's born to an Italian family in Corsica, which is this island right here. Has an accent that is not French, so like he kind of spoke with that Corsican accent. And then, of course, you have the man with the mustache in the 20th century, born in Austria, but leads the German nation to conquering most of Europe. Just kind of an interesting observation.
Under his military genius, France conquered an empire that spanned the continent. But finally, he has been defeated by a grand coalition of his enemies. Napoleon is forced to abdicate and exiled to the tiny island of Elba, while the Bourbon monarchy is restored to France in the corpulent form of Louis XVIII.
Louis XVIII is, I believe, the brother of Louis XVI. Yeah, same name, I know, but yeah, I believe he is the younger brother of Louis XVI, who was famously guillotined at the beginning of the events that lead into the Napoleonic Wars.
But rumors soon reached Napoleon that France would welcome his return. The French people have little love for the monarchy or its hangers-on, the very people whose excesses led to the French Revolution 25 years before.
I mean, think about that. How does Napoleon rise to power? On the strength of his ability, right? He's a great commander in the field. He wins victories. He doesn't rise to power because he's born into like this really, really rich, wealthy noble family. It is a minor noble family, but he rises on his ability. So now to put this king back in, this fat older man who only gets in because his brother was king, and now all the aristocrats that go along with that, which is the very thing they were fighting a revolution against in the first place. It was between Napoleon with all the baggage that came with that at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, or what's the alternative, right?
He also learns that at the Congress of Vienna, his enemies are locked in bitter dispute over the future of Europe. Napoleon decides to act.
So he's once again counting on them being divided.
After just 10 months in exile, he returns to France, where the troops sent to arrest him rally to his cause instead.
Under Marshal Ney.
Most of France soon follows suit. But in Vienna, the coalition immediately put their differences to one side. They declare Napoleon an outlaw and mobilize their forces for war. Napoleon knows he must act boldly before the coalition launches a coordinated invasion of France. He counts on winning a quick victory and then negotiating peace from a position of strength. He targets the coalition armies within easiest reach: Prince Blücher's Prussian army and the Duke of Wellington's Anglo-Allied army, both camped in Belgium.
who Napoleon's really never faced on the battlefield, right? His marshals have faced Wellington, but I cannot think of a time that Napoleon and Wellington have fought head-to-head before this.
Napoleon's force is a match for either coalition army on its own, but he'll be heavily outnumbered if they're able to join forces, so he must keep them apart and defeat each in turn.
Almost does, too. So keep in mind, when we're talking about the Netherlands here, we are talking about Belgium as well. Belgium's going to get its independence from the Netherlands like 1830-ish. So this battle is going to take place just outside of Brussels. It's like 20 miles outside of Brussels. Where I'll be next week.
Napoleon's army crosses the frontier near Charleroi, intending to drive a wedge between the two coalition armies. The next day, Napoleon sends his left wing under Marshal Ney to take the crossroads at Quatre Bras. There, Ney clashes with Wellington's army, still scrambling into position. The Allied troops fight off a series of French attacks and just manage to hold their ground.
So we talk about this all the time. You know, you can plan what you can plan, but then there are those factors that are outside of your control, and that's one of the things that's going to undo Napoleon. Now, I should preface all of this by saying, and I've said it before, I think we give way too much credit to Waterloo for what it does. And we often do this with events like Gettysburg and Waterloo and, I don't know, something like Normandy. You know, these events that we kind of spin them in our collective memories when talking about history as like a turning point, or as if this one event goes a different way, then everything goes a different way. And I think Waterloo in that regard is way overblown. And I've said this before, if Napoleon wins at Waterloo and he's able to do what he wants to do, then there's another Waterloo and another Waterloo and another Waterloo. There's no scenario at this point in which Napoleon comes out victorious in the war. There were just too many things going against him, too many armies that would have converged on him. If he'd won the Battle of Waterloo, it would not have mattered. He still would have lost the war. But speaking of Waterloo specifically, his idea of, you know, hit one and kind of keep him busy while I hit the other one and defeat him, and then turn my whole army to defeat the other guy. It's a good plan, and he's used that plan many times before. And it might have even been successful at the Battle of Waterloo if for that one factor he couldn't kind of account for. The weather. The rain is going to slow him down, and it's going to be one of those weird quirks of history that causes just enough of a delay to keep him from winning the battle.
The same day, Napoleon attacks Blücher's Prussian army with his main force near the village of Ligny. The battle is a brutal slugging match, but the French emerge triumphant. The 72-year-old Blücher leads a cavalry charge in person and has his horse killed under him.
Wow.
He only just escapes capture. The Prussian army retreats, but it is not broken. Napoleon sends his right wing under Marshal Grouchy to keep them on the run, and turns his own attention to Wellington's army. The British general doesn't receive news of Blücher's defeat until the next morning, at which point he orders a retreat through heavy summer showers to a position 8 miles south of Brussels, near the village of Waterloo.
And remember, Napoleon, I don't think, has ever taken on Wellington before, and Wellington knows this ground, right? This is one of those situations where he's falling back, but he's falling back to a place that he knows is better to defend. He's falling back to a position of strength, and he's going to draw Napoleon in, and then he's going to pounce.
There he receives a promise from Blücher that the Prussians will march to his aid the next morning. So Wellington decides to stand and fight. Wellington has chosen his battlefield with care. His troops are behind a gentle ridge which will give them some shelter from French cannon fire.
Huge.
His right flank is anchored on the farmhouse of Hougoumont,
So if you know Napoleon he's an artillery guy and he uses artillery well, first thing you want to do is neutralize the effectiveness of his artillery. Then you find strong points to hold. And if this whole battle depends on buying time for Blücher to get there with the Prussian army, then you want to buy time by doing things like fortifying some troops at Hougoumont, but not using your whole force there, so that it'll slow the French down because they've got to deal with that. Now, it's tough for the guys that are defending that, but it, again, buys time before Napoleon hits your main force, and hopefully then the Prussians show up.
His centre on the farm of La Haye-Sainte, and his left on the farm of Papelotte. All three are fortified and garrisoned with elite troops. Wellington's men need every advantage they can get. The opposing armies are roughly equal in size, but his is a ragtag mix of British, Dutch, and German troops, many of whom have never seen combat before.
And Kingdom of Hanover, remember, at this point, the Kingdom of Hanover is under the British crown. Who's the King of Hanover? King George III. Same guy that's the King of the United Kingdom at this point. The Netherlands have close family ties, but also close political ties at this point to the British. Brunswick is German. I think it's Braunschweig is how it's said in German. So even's not how you want to go against Napoleon, though, right? You want to have a big advantage when you're taking him on.
They will have to hold off Napoleon's army of veterans until Prussian reinforcements arrive, or the battle, and probably the war, will be lost.
Not the war. Not the war.
Sunday dawns bright and fair. Napoleon has ordered Marshal Grouchy to pursue the Prussians and keep them busy, while he defeats Wellington's army at Waterloo and opens the road to Brussels. But it's Grouchy who gets pinned down, fighting the Prussian rearguard at Wavre. The main Prussian force eludes him and is already marching to Wellington's aid. At Waterloo, Napoleon delays his attack, waiting for the ground to dry, which...
It's fascinating because most of these Napoleonic Wars battles are spread out over this huge area with multiple villages and, places where you just can't see from one end to the other. This is a very traditional battlefield, right? Both sides on high ground with a valley in between, putting all your artillery up on the ridge, seeing your opponent on the other ridge. I highly, highly recommend the 1970 movie Waterloo. It's fantastic. And they used tens of thousands of Soviet soldiers who had dressed and trained the part. And it just looks phenomenal. We will never see anything like that again because now we have special effects. It's so, so good.
Which will make movement easier for his troops. But the lost hours will later prove costly. The battle begins around 11 a.m., when Napoleon orders a feint against Wellington's right flank at Hougoumont. He hopes Wellington will commit his reserves here, drawing them away from the center, where the main blow will fall.
So I'm constantly talking about connections to the Civil War because it's what I know well. But there's also a practical reason for that. And that is that this is about the time, during the Napoleonic Wars, is when the United States sets up West Point, its military academy, to train officers. So what are you going to train your officers on? Napoleonic tactics, right? So most of the generals, the West Point grads who are leading armies in the American Civil War, were brought up with Napoleon's tactics. And a classic example of that is Gettysburg, right? Lee uses this very tactic, right? On July 2nd, he attacks the left and the right of the Union Army, drawing forces from the center to strengthen the flanks. So then on July 3rd, he thinks, now I'm going to attack the center because that's what I've weakened by attacking the flanks. The problem is that General Meade is also a student of Napoleonic tactics, and he knows that's what the strategy is, and so he defends against it.
But Hougomont's British and German defenders cling on desperately throughout the day. At one point, the French force their way through the main gate, but it's shut behind them, and the intruders are all killed.
So, this is the kind of thing this battle turns on. Napoleon has to wait till 11 o'clock to attack because he's waiting for the ground to dry after it rained all night the night before. Now he finally launches his attack, and there's a small force holding a place like Hougoumont, which is only supposed to be a feint to draw Wellington out, and it's taking way too long to do this. Everything is slowing him down, and speed is what he needs.
Wellington later calls it the decisive moment of the battle. Around noon, 80 French cannon open fire against the main Allied line. Most of Wellington's men are out of sight on the reverse slope, but many cannonballs still find their mark, smashing bloody holes in the Allied ranks.
They bounce, they roll.
At 1:30 p.m., Napoleon sends in his infantry. The French columns are met by disciplined musket fire, and then charged by British heavy cavalry. The French attack disintegrates as Napoleon's men try to save themselves from the crushing hooves and flashing sabres. Scores of Frenchmen are ridden down, and 2 of their famous Eagle standards are captured. But the British cavalry, exhilarated by success, charge too far. They become scattered, their horses blown. At their most vulnerable, they're countercharged by French cavalry and suffer terrible losses. Among the dead, Major General Sir William Ponsonby, commander of the Union Brigade. Around 4 p.m., Marshal Ney thinks he sees the Allies begin to retreat and leads a mass cavalry charge to drive home the advantage. But Ney is wrong. The Allied infantry are ready, formed in hollow squares with bayonets fixed.
So we've talked about this before. Basically, you're playing like a game of rock, paper, scissors. So in other words, paper beats rock, rock beats scissors, scissors beat paper. So you're always trying to match up your rock against their scissors, so to speak. So forming square defeats cavalry if you're infantry, but it gets defeated by artillery. But where is the artillery? Well, it's not able to hit these guys on the other side of the ridge. So you're riding your cavalry into a situation where they don't have the advantage, and the thing that would have the advantage over those squares can't really do anything about it.
The French cavalry can't break into these impregnable formations. They can only circle impotently until they retreat or are shot from the saddle. Ney's failure to support this attack with either infantry or artillery is a serious blunder.
Yep.
Meanwhile, Blücher's Prussians have begun to arrive.
Not only arrive, but where are they arriving? Behind Napoleon.
They capture the village of Plancenoit, threatening Napoleon's flank and forcing him to send reserves to recapture it. Around 6 p.m., French infantry finally capture the farmhouse of La Haye-Sainte in the center of the battlefield.
So this is 7 hours after the initial attack, right? So had you been able to launch your attack 4 hours earlier, 5 hours earlier, this is June, so you're probably getting daylight at 4 or 5 in the morning, right? You could have launched this attack 6 hours earlier, and then you have a different story altogether.
It allows the French to bring forward artillery and blast the Allied squares from close range.
Which is what they needed.
They can't miss the closely packed formations.
And we've talked about this several episodes ago, but if you missed that, why does this work so well? Because a lot of this is solid shot, and a solid shot fired at close range is going to go through. If you've got squares, you've got 4 or 5 guys deep between the front side and the back side of the square. You're able to take out 10, 15 guys with one shot. It's instead of just one long line where it might go through one guy.
And casualties quickly mount. It begins to seem that if Wellington's army doesn't retreat, it will be killed where it stands. But the situation for Napoleon is also desperate. The Prussians are arriving in force, and he's running out of men to throw against Wellington's army.
So this is 7 p.m. when the Prussians are arriving in force. This battle, take away the rain, I keep saying it, but take away the rain, this battle's over. Napoleon's already driven off Wellington, and now he turns his whole force on Prussia.
So he turns to his ultimate reserve, the elite Imperial Guard, the most feared troops in Europe. At 7:30 p.m., 3,000 of these battle-hardened veterans march past their emperor and across the corpse-strewn battlefield towards the Allied centre. Wellington's redcoats rise to meet them and pour devastating volleys of musket fire into their ranks. When the Allies fix bayonets and prepare to charge, the Imperial Guard wavers and then retreats. Wellington, sensing victory, orders a general advance. About the same time, the Prussians recapture Plancenoit. News of the Imperial Guard's defeat and rumours of encirclement by the Prussians sweep through the French ranks. Panic breaks out, and the French army flees the battlefield.
That's it.
Only Napoleon's old guard maintain their discipline, mounting a heroic but doomed rearguard action. Napoleon himself is forced to abandon his carriage and barely escapes the pursuing Prussian cavalry. The battle is won. The Duke of Wellington and Prince Blücher meet and congratulate each other outside Napoleon's former headquarters, an inn called La Belle Alliance. Blücher thinks it's the perfect name for their shared victory, but Wellington prefers the more English-sounding Waterloo, where he has his own headquarters. The Battle of Waterloo was, in the words of the Duke of Wellington, a damned near-run thing.
Yeah.
It was also one of the bloodiest battles of the age. Around 50,000 men were killed or wounded, 23,000 coalition casualties, 27,000 French. Due to an appalling shortage of medical care, many of the wounded were left lying on the battlefield for several days.
Several days in June, right? So warm weather, probably some humidity, bodies decaying and smelling, and the health situation must have been abysmal.
Napoleon was utterly defeated. Unable to raise another army, he surrendered to the British. They transported him to a second exile on the tiny, remote Atlantic island of St. Helena. This time...
Interesting, by the way, that this was not the only defeated monarch that will be exiled there. Later on, the British, and maybe other ones too, but the only one I know for sure, at some point the British exiled the king of the Zulus there as well. So kind of a place they like to do that sort of thing. It's out in the middle of nowhere.
There was no escape. He died there 6 years later. Waterloo marked the beginning of a period of relative peace in Europe. There were no wars between the great powers for 40 years, and the British would not fight on the continent for another 100 years, until the summer of 1914. 40 years after the battle, a pioneer in the new art of photography captured these remarkable images. They're veterans of Napoleon's armies, by then all old men in their 70s and 80s. Among them, Sergeant Tania of the Imperial Guard, Moret of the 2nd Regiment of Hussars, and Verline of the 2nd Guard Lancers.
There's also photographs of Wellington, who was still alive long enough to be photographed.
These faces are a tantalizing link to the dramatic events that shaped the course of history 2 centuries ago.
That's so cool. All right, that was great stuff. I really, really enjoyed that whole series, and man, it just has me hungry to learn more about such a fascinating time in history. So let me know your thoughts. Let's talk. Let's learn more together. Use the comment section below. and we'll see you again soon with something new. If you are a patron or a member and you would like to vote on what comes next, check that out. Those are privately available to you. And I encourage you, if you've never done it before, to consider, especially Patreon, because Patreon doesn't take nearly as much out of what you donate as YouTube does. So I prefer that. Your money goes further, and it helps support trips like the one that I'll be taking next week to Europe to make content for the channel. So thanks for watching.